My heart started racing when Mr. Harrison opened the door. There I was, a simple Monterey fisherman, standing at the entrance of the most imposing mansion I'd ever seen. Emily's perfume was still clinging to my jacket from the night before, but it was the piercing look from her dad that left me breathless at that moment. "Ryan, come in. We need to talk about you and my daughter." Hit that like button if you've ever felt that mix of fear and fascination when you meet the parents of the person you love. I never thought that at 32 I'd be starting over. 3 years ago, I left the hustle and bustle of San Francisco to settle in this little coastal community. My small wooden house is only 200 meters from the ocean. It's simple, but it's got the essentials. A deck overlooking the ocean, a functional kitchen, and a fireplace that turns into my best buddy on cold nights. Every day I get up at 5 in the morning. The routine is always the same: a strong coffee while I watch the horizon turn shades of orange and pink. Then I get the boat ready for another day's work. The smell of sea air clings to my clothes and hands. The tan lines on my face tell the stories of whole days out at sea. Loneliness has its value too. After a messy divorce, I learned to appreciate the quiet and the predictability of my days. My only companions are the seagulls flying over the boat waiting for scraps of fish, and Joe, the old guy at the market who buys my catch. Occasionally, I trade a few words with curious tourists, but never more than necessary. Evenings are for reading or making small repairs on the boat and at home. Every now and then, I treat myself to a beer at the only bar in town. It's a simple life, without surprises. Or it was, until that March afternoon. The sky was especially clear that day. I was heading back to the dock with a modest catch when I noticed a luxurious yacht anchored in the bay. You don't normally see boats of that size around here. Something about that ship made me uneasy, like a bad omen. 3 hours later, while I was sorting out my nets, I heard a voice that definitely didn't belong there. "Excuse me, could you help me out?" I turned around and saw a woman of about 28, her brown hair swaying in the sea breeze. She was dressed casually, but her watch and her posture made it clear she wasn't from our fishing community. "Emily Harrison," she introduced herself, extending her hand with a smile that lit up the whole afternoon. "My dad's having trouble with the yacht's engine, and they said you know your way around these things." "Ryan Carver," I replied, wiping my hands before shaking hers. "I can take a look, but I can't promise anything. Yacht engines are a whole different ballgame compared to our fishing boats." She had such an easy way of chatting as we walked toward the yacht. She explained that she was snapping photos for a travel magazine. Her dad, a hotel business owner, was considering investing in the area. He talked about New York the way I talk about the best time to fish for anchovies. When we got to the yacht, I was introduced to Mr. Harrison, tall, imposing, with calculating eyes that sized me up from head to toe. He barely masked his displeasure when he noticed my worn clothes and calloused hands. The following weeks brought a new routine. Emily stayed in town while her dad was away on business. The engine problem turned out to be more complicated than I thought, so I ended up offering to fix it in my spare time. "I've never met anyone who really understands the sea like you do," Emily said one afternoon while she watched me work on the repair. I started showing her the best spots to photograph the sunset. She taught me some basics about photography. I made her a seafood soup with my catch of the day. She even brought a bottle of wine from a vintage I'd never be able to afford. We came from completely different worlds, yet our conversations flowed so naturally. For the first time in years, loneliness didn't feel like an old friend, but rather like an absence that was starting to hurt. Mr. Harrison's return hit like a storm on the calm horizon Emily and I had created. He showed up without warning, just as I was showing her how to grill the fish perfectly on my deck. "So, this is where you spend your days," he said, eyeing our closeness with obvious distrust. The tension was palpable. As Emily tried to explain, I noticed how she changed around her dad, more reserved, almost submissive. "Daddy, Ryan's been really kind and—" "I'm sure he has," he interrupted, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I came to invite you, Mr. Carver, to dinner with us tomorrow, as a thank you for the services rendered to my daughter." Something about the way he emphasized services made my stomach turn. Emily looked just as surprised by the invitation. I accepted, of course. How could I say no? But as I watched them head toward the yacht, a strange feeling overtook me. Mr. Harrison looked back one last time, his eyes meeting mine a second longer than was comfortable. At that moment, I couldn't tell if I was feeling apprehension or an inexplicable curiosity about what that dinner really meant. Dinner at the Harrison Beach House was set for 8 p.m., but I got there at 7:40, parking my old pickup among cars that cost more than I'd make in 10 years. I put on my only decent dress shirt, Navy blue, bought for my father's funeral. I even brought a bottle of local wine, nothing compared to what they drank, but as genuine as everything else on this coast. Emily answered the door. She was wearing an emerald green dress that made her eyes pop. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "You came," she whispered, as if there was any chance I'd say no. "Of course," I replied, catching a whiff of the soft perfume she was wearing. The house was impressive. Huge windows facing the ocean, light wooden furniture and artwork that probably cost more than my house. Outside, the sea I knew so well. Inside, a completely different world. Mr. Harrison appeared holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed me one without even asking if I wanted one. Being on time. "I like that in a man," he said, raising his glass in a silent toast. Unlike our first meeting, he seemed almost welcoming. His eyes were still sizing me up, but in a different way, less hostile and more curious. He wore light linen pants and a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, showing off a gold watch and tanned forearms. "Emily told me you gave up a promising engineering career to become a fisherman," he said, leading me onto the terrace. "An interesting choice." "I didn't give anything up, Mr. Harrison. I just chose a different path." "Please, call me Thomas," he replied with an enigmatic smile. The evening passed with elaborate dishes prepared by a private chef and conversations drifting from politics to books, from travel to philosophy. To my surprise, Thomas seemed genuinely interested in my opinions. Every now and then, our eyes met in a way I couldn't quite decipher. Emily watched our interaction with a hard-to-read expression, a mix of relief and something more complicated. Under the table, her hand occasionally brushed against my knee, an intimate gesture that didn't go unnoticed by her dad, whose eyebrows would slightly lift every time we touched. "Ryan is fascinating, isn't he, Daddy?" she asked as silence fell during dessert. "Yeah," Thomas agreed, his eyes locked on mine. Fascinating is the right word. The next morning, I was surprised to see Thomas waiting at the dock. He was there alone, dressed casually, almost unrecognizable without his business-like air. "I'd love to see what a day in the life of a fisherman is like," he announced with an enthusiasm that seemed genuine. "If you don't mind." I have to admit, I hesitated. His presence was a bit unsettling in a way I couldn't quite figure out. But how could I say no? "The sea doesn't care who we are on land," I told him as I handed over a life vest. "Here, we're all just small." On the boat, I watched Thomas transform. The stiff, controlling man gave way to someone almost childlike in his curiosity. He kept asking questions, wanting to know about every piece of equipment, every decision. His hands, clearly not used to physical work, soon turned red and got a bit sore. "Have you ever thought about going back? About your old life, I mean?" he asked as I cast the nets. "Going back would mean I left," I replied, as I felt the familiar sway of the boat. "But I never really left. I found my place." He looked at me as if I'd said something deeply wise, not just another simple observation from a simple man. When an unexpected school of fish appeared, adrenaline took over. We worked together hauling in the nets, our hands brushing against each other now and then, our bodies close because of the tight space. There was a moment while we were struggling with the weight of the net, when our faces were only inches apart. I could feel his heavy breathing, see the fine wrinkles around his eyes, and notice how he quickly moistened his lips. Eventually, the fish were hauled in, breaking that strange and intense moment. Thomas was soaked in seawater and sweat, his shirt clinging to him, but he was smiling like I'd never seen him smile before. "I think I finally understand you, Ryan," he said, his voice deeper than usual. Back at the dock later that afternoon, he insisted on helping me clean the boat and organize the catch. When we finished, he looked up at the orange sky and then back at me. "Emily is in San Francisco today for a meeting with the magazine," he remarked casually. "Would you like to have dinner at the house? The chef made more than enough." There was something about the way he made that invitation that told me it wasn't just about food. Still, I accepted. The house was quiet when we arrived. Thomas offered me some dry clothes, clearly his, since they were a bit too big for me. While I changed in the guest bathroom, I couldn't help but take in the luxury items, the soft towels, the marble details. This was his world, so far from mine. We dined on the veranda, with the sound of the waves as our background music. Thomas served an expensive wine, and we talked about his rough youth, how he built his empire from nothing, his disillusionments. "Do you know why I wasn't initially fond of you being with Emily?" he asked after his third glass. "Because I'm just a hopeless fisherman," I replied, half joking, half serious. "Because you remind me of who I was before I lost myself," he said, surprising me. "Authentic, passionate about what you do." without being chained to other people's expectations. He moved closer on the deck chair next to mine. Dusk had given way to night, and the stars started peppering the sky. The sea breeze carried his scent, a blend of expensive cologne and that unique smell that was all his. "Thomas, I started, not quite sure what to say. "You know exactly what's going on here, don't you?" he whispered, his voice low. I nodded slowly. I knew, even if I didn't fully understand. There was something growing between us from the very first look, a connection that went beyond my relationship with Emily, beyond conventions, beyond anything I'd ever expected. His knee brushed against mine deliberately. His hand rested on my arm, his thumb making tiny circles on my skin. I didn't pull away. "This is crazy," I murmured, more to myself than anyone else. "Life's too short not to take a few crazy risks," he replied. When his hand slid up to my face, tracing the line of my jaw with surprisingly gentle fingers, I closed my eyes. What happened next was like diving into unknown waters, scary and liberating at the same time. Our lips first met hesitantly, then with an urgency that caught me off guard. His hands explored my body as if mapping out a new territory, and mine responded with equal curiosity. There was a hunger in his movements, a need that echoed something inside me I had never recognized before. The walk to his room was punctuated by discarded clothes, ragged breathing, and the distant sound of the ocean. In the dim light, his body told the story of a life. Old scars, still firm muscles, vulnerabilities carefully hidden from the outside world. That night, we discovered a language without words. Like waves crashing against rocks, we molded each other, finding rhythms that felt both ancient and completely new at the same time. It was like navigating stormy seas. Dangerous, intense, addictive. His experience guided my own discovery. My hands, used to nets and ropes, found new purposes as they explored spots that made him sigh and shudder. Like a storm that gradually gained strength, we moved together in a primitive dance of desire and mutual recognition. When we finally reached our peak, it was as if the ocean itself erupted inside of us, a natural force impossible to contain or deny. Afterward, lying side by side, staring at the ceiling as our breathing returned to normal, the silence was both comforting and heavy with meaning. Dawn found us still tangled in each other. It was a phone call that broke the spell, Emily calling to say she'd be back that afternoon. Reality crashed into the room like the unyielding, clear light of the sun. Thomas answered with an impressive nonchalance, his voice betraying nothing of what had happened between us. I watched him talk to his daughter, guilt anchoring itself in my chest. When he hung up, our eyes met, now heavy with the weight of what we'd done. "That was," I started, unable to finish. "Exceptional," he completed, without a trace of regret in his tone. "But complicated." I got up, gathering my scattered clothes and trying to rearrange not just my outfit but my thoughts. What did it all mean? What I felt for Emily was real. I was sure of that. But what had happened with Thomas was undeniably authentic too. "Don't beat yourself up," he advised, looking at me with those piercing eyes. "Life rarely fits neatly into simple categories. Emily doesn't deserve this," I replied, the guilt plain in my voice. He moved closer, now wearing a silk robe, and caressed my face with a surprising gentleness. "Nobody's talking about hurting Emily," he stated, "but you can't deny what happened here." "And what exactly happened?" "Two men discovering an unexpected connection," he answered simply. "Something that exists alongside what you feel for my daughter, not against it." I left the house with more questions than answers, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. On my way back to my cabin, the ocean seemed different, wider, more mysterious, as if reflecting the unexpected expansion of my own inner world. The following days were an exercise in compartmentalization. With Emily, I maintained our budding relationship. Walks on the beach, talks about our dreams, kisses that still made my heart race. But now there was a shadow between us. The secret of what had happened with her dad. Thomas kept a respectful distance when the three of us were together, but his occasional glances said much more than words ever could. Sometimes, when Emily went out to photograph the sunrise, he would appear at the dock. In those stolen moments, we would revisit our silent discovery. On my boat, in hidden corners of the beach, once even at my own cabin. Each encounter was both ecstasy and agony. The physical pleasure and connection were undeniable. Yet the weight of disappointing Emily grew with every meeting. "We can't keep going like this," I finally told Thomas after a particularly intense encounter at his boathouse. "We're betraying her trust." He stayed silent for a long moment, looking out at the horizon through a small window. "So, what do you propose?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I do know I need to be honest, with myself and with her." Thomas sighed, for the first time sounding his age. "Do you think she'd understand? That her father and the man she loves?" He trailed off. "Probably not," I replied, the pain clear in my voice. "Which means I have to choose." The chance to decide came sooner than I expected. That very night, Emily showed up at my door, radiating excitement with news of a photo exhibition in New York. She wanted me to come with her, to get a glimpse of her world, just as she had gotten a taste of mine. "It'll only be for a few weeks," she explained, her eyes sparkling with possibility. "Then we can decide. What's next?" That "what's next" hung between us, loaded with unspoken promises, a future together, maybe even a shared life. She was offering me a ticket into her world, a fresh start at life with her. "I need to think about it," I answered, seeing the disappointment in her eyes. Later, alone with my thoughts, I looked out over the ocean from my porch. The sea had always been my counselor, my quiet confidant. But that night, even its constant waves couldn't provide any answers. Thomas appeared around midnight. We didn't talk about Emily's proposal. He surely already knew. Instead, we sat side by side, watching the moon reflect on the water. "You chose this place because it reflects who you are," he finally said. "Unpredictable at times, deep, always on the move, but always true to your nature." "What do you mean, Thomas?" "That any decision that doesn't honor your true self will eventually become unsustainable." We didn't make love that night. Instead, we sat in thoughtful silence until dawn, like two navigators contemplating divergent routes. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get more stories like this. Morning brought clarity, as it often does. As the sun rose over the horizon, I finally understood what I had to do. The answer had been inside me all along, like a fish hiding deep down, waiting for the right moment to come up to the surface. I looked for Emily first, finding her on the beach, photographing the fishermen returning with their morning catch. "I can't go to New York," she said, simply, as she lowered her camera. The disappointment on her face was obvious, but there was also a resigned understanding. "It's because of my dad, isn't it?" she asked, catching me completely off guard. My shock must have been plain to see because she gave a sad smile. "I know my dad better than you two can imagine," she continued, "and I know that look in his eyes, and in yours." "Emily, you don't need to explain," she interrupted. Part of me always knew there was something more going on. I just didn't want to believe it. "I really care about you," I said, feeling how those words fell short. "I know," she replied, touching my face one last time. "But it's not enough, is it? Not for either of us." I watched her walk along the beach, drifting away from my life with the same grace with which she'd entered it. There was pain, yes, but also a strange relief. The weight of the lie finally lifted. Thomas was waiting on his porch when I arrived. Something in my face must have told him what had happened, because he just nodded, without a word. "She knows," I said simply. "I always knew this day would come," he replied. "Emily is far more perceptive than we let on." "And now?" Thomas got up and walked over to me with his signature confidence. "Now, we're sailing these unknown waters together," he said. "I don't know where we'll end up, Ryan. I can't promise a specific future, but I can promise honesty from now on." "That's enough," I replied, feeling a strange peace settling over me. That afternoon, we headed out together on my boat. No set destination, just letting the wind and currents take us where they might. The sun shone down on us. The sea stretched out infinitely in all directions. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Life rarely follows the paths we plan. Sometimes it takes us through turbulent waters, to places we never imagined visiting. But maybe true courage lies in accepting the journey, in navigating the unknown with an open heart to all possibilities. And if you liked this story about unexpected encounters and the courage to follow your true heart, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more genuine tales of the complexities of love and desire. After all, we all deserve to find our own safe harbor, no matter how unpredictable the journey may be.